Hello friends, Steve Stockton here with you. Welcome to our latest video. In this episode, we'll bring you strange legends, missing persons, and more from Mount Rainier, which is right there behind me. Join us. Mount Rainier National Park is located in the U.S. state of Washington, in southeast Pierce County and northeast Lewis County, with Tacoma being its nearest city. Mount Rainier National Park was first established on March 2nd, 1899, as the fifth national park in the U.S., preserving more than 236,000 acres of land, including all of Mount Rainier, which is a stratovolcano. Stratovolcanoes are characterized by a steep profile with a summit crater and periodic intervals of explosive eruptions. I wouldn't worry too much, though. Mount Rainier last erupted about 150 years ago. Rising to 14,410 feet above sea level, the mountain is the highest point in the Cascade Range and stands as an icon in the Washington landscape. Mount Rainier is the most glaciated peak in the contiguous U.S. and spawns 5 major rivers. Subalpine wildflower meadows surround the icy volcano cliffs, and ancient forests cloak Mount Rainier's lower slopes. This diverse habitat provides for a large assortment of wildlife. Mount Rainier is a popular peak for mountaineering, with about 10,000 attempts to summit each year and only around 50% being successful. The park provides plenty of outdoor activities and attractions like hiking, camping, bird watching, historical sites, and more. Over 2 million people visit the park each year to enjoy these activities. Sometimes, though, things don't always go as planned for those who venture to Mount Rainier National Park. Although not actively publicized for obvious reasons, for all the beauty the park has to offer, bad things happen on Mount Rainier, and people mysteriously go missing from the area every year without so much as a trace left behind. In this episode, we're going to look at mysteries, legends, and strange disappearances from Mount Rainier National Park. Let's start off with some mysteries and legends. First up, Bigfoot encounters. Before we delve totally into this divisive topic and uncertain existence of Bigfoot, let's put on our thinking caps for a moment and simply consider. Is it possible there are, as of yet, undiscovered animal species in the wild? A resounding yes. Scientists discover new species all the time. And do we know everything there is to know about this world we all share? Absolutely not. As such, we must at least entertain the idea that there are concepts, events, and yes, living creatures out there that we cannot fully understand. With that in mind, let's begin our Mount Rainier National Park journey and cover some of the reported sightings and potential evidence found in the area of the tall, bipedal, hair-covered creature, most famously known as Bigfoot. Bigfoot, also commonly referred to as Sasquatch, has been spotted all over the United States. Washington State, however, is a prime location for sightings of the elusive creature. Recorded sightings go back as early as 1912, when a woman saw a tall, ape-like creature staring in the window of her ranch house. Reports continued all throughout the 1900s, ranging from hunters spotting the creature to campers being spooked awake by 7-foot-tall beasts. Some of the most notable evidence of Bigfoot in the Mount Rainier area consists of several photographs allegedly made in 1995 at Wild Creek in the nearby foothills, captured by a Forest Patrol officer. Although numerous red flags are noted, as by Bigfoot authors Janet and Colin Board, who wrote in 2006, with any event where the subject is known to be elusive, clear photographs are naturally suspect. In this case, we note that Bigfoot seems to not have moved from shot to shot, which seems unlikely, and the photographer must have been a very brave man indeed to have stayed around long enough to shoot 14 frames of an unpredictable monster. Now, this skepticism hasn't stopped the reported sightings, though. What are considered to be some of the best Sasquatch footprints ever cast were found near Mount Rainier. These prints were found by mushroom pickers near the national park. Plaster casts taken were 7 inches by 14 inches and appeared to belong to a large ape-like creature. The mushroom pickers didn't get far into their journey when they reported smelling something worse than skunk odor, which is often a telltale sign of the creature's presence. Could Mount Rainier National Park be a hiding place for Bigfoot? Being a protected land full of wilderness, it would be an ideal area for a being that wishes to remain unseen. Is the creature perhaps to blame for some of these strange disappearances in the park? Or are Sasquatch just keeping their distance, though they mean us no harm. Let us know what you think. Next up, flying saucers. Famously, on June 24th, 1947, Kenneth Arnold saw something near Mount Rainier that changed the public's perception of extraterrestrials forever. At the time, Kenneth Arnold was 32 years old, married with 2 children, and lived in Meridian, Idaho, where he sold fire extinguishing equipment for a living. He was also in the Idaho Search and Rescue and had over 4,000 hours of high-altitude piloting hours at the time. Overall, he lived a typical life and was known to be a sincere and trustworthy person. On that fateful day, June 24, 1947, Kenneth was flying from Chehalis to Yakima when he decided to spend an hour or so searching for a downed C-46 Marine transport which had recently crashed into the southwest side of Mount Rainier. There was a $5,000 reward for finding the downed aircraft, so that most likely was Kenneth's motivating factor. His flight was going well at first, though there was no sign of the plane wreckage. Kenneth would later recall in an interview, "It was a beautiful day, just as clear as a bell." But then, everything suddenly changed. Kenneth remembered it was around 3 p.m., and he says, "A very bright flash lit up the plane and the sky around me. At first he thought it was just the sun, perhaps reflecting off another plane in the area. But the flash happened again," he said, "and that's when I saw where it was coming from. It came spasmodically from a chain of 9 circular-type aircraft way up from the vicinity of Mount Rainier. I could not find any tails on these things. They didn't leave a jet trail behind them. I judged their size to be at least 100 feet in wingspan. I thought it was a new type of missile." Kenneth observed the multiple aircraft and tried to make sense of what he was seeing. His plane had a big sweep 24-hour clock on the instrument panel, and by his measurements, the objects had covered the distance between Mount Rainier and Mount Adams in 1 minute and 42 seconds. He was stunned by this realization. Kenneth said, "That figured out to something like 1,760 miles an hour, which I could hardly believe. I knew that figure couldn't be entirely accurate, but I'd say it was within a couple of 100 miles of accurate." He didn't know what to make of this at first, so he continued on from Yakima to an air show in Pendleton, Oregon. Then, the next day, June 25th, Kenneth stopped by the local newspaper called the East Oregonian. He asked reporter Bill Baguette if the military was testing any secret warplanes in the area. Bill shrugged, not thinking anything of it. Kenneth then explained that he was flying his small plane near Mount Rainier when he saw those 9 bright objects, shaped like the heel of a Florsham shoe, flying in formation, and that he had timed them at more than twice the speed of the world's then fastest airplane. Bill, the reporter, still didn't think much of this news, but he typed out about 4 paragraphs to run in the paper. Then he left for lunch, and Kenneth went on his way. When Bill returned from lunch, he realized he had underestimated the public's interest in the flying saucer story. "Where have you been?" the receptionist asked. "They've been calling from everywhere. New York, Portland, Montreal. They want more," she said. "More on the saucers." Bill hadn't thought the story was that big of a deal at first, but after running a longer story on Kenneth's encounter, he said it was like throwing a lighted match into a field of wheatgrass. The story blew up further from there. We would call it going viral. Even the vocabulary regarding UFO sightings changed after Kenneth's bizarre encounter. The term flying saucers wasn't really around before Kenneth's report. But after word got out, there was a wave of people who came forward to back his story. The Seattle Daily Times reported that a lady named Elma Shingler had seen strange and shiny platter-like objects on 2 different occasions that were moving at a terrible speed. Elma further stated that this was in the last 10 days, once Kenneth's encounter came to light. And this was only the beginning. The debate about extraterrestrial visits grew rapidly, and the nation was divided. During the next half-century, thousands of Americans, including Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter, who would later become president, observed UFOs. Why would all this fuss have come about if it were just a hoax, as some people claim? None of it made any sense. Within 2 weeks of Kenneth's story about his encounter near Mount Rainier, people in 28 states and from as far abroad as Australia and Afghanistan reported seeing flying saucers. Something was definitely going on. Something had changed. One publisher offered a bounty to anyone who could bring one of the crafts down. The Oregon National Guard even launched a fighter squadron to have a look about. Many people believe that, rather than extraterrestrial in nature, the flying saucers were experimental military aircraft being tested by the United States, which wasn't so far-fetched. Even so, many people still thought the whole thing was a hoax, and any official entity which gave validity to Kenneth's story was quickly shot down. Why would the government want to hide reports of UFOs, though? Not only that, newspapers and journals began running stories that intentionally made Kenneth sound crazy. They would intentionally get the story wrong to further the theory that he was some kind of kook or crackpot. It took an emotional toll on Kenneth and his family. Eric Lycidas interviewed Kenneth by phone 30 years after the incident on June 25, 1977. Kenneth recalled in that interview, "This one paper in Mexico said the sighting was June 24, 1974. Then they said that the flying saucers were circling my plane and played hopscotch with me in the Cascade Mountains. That's not what happened." Kenneth also told his interviewer that writing letters to the editors was useless because then they would just turn around and use that against him as well. He remarked, "It's impossible, I tell you." Kenneth was 62 at the time of this phone interview, and his story remained the same. He saw what he saw, and he was the first to report these flying saucers. He was asked if it bothered him that for 30 years, many people thought of him as a kook or crazy. Kenneth responded, "I didn't make my report because I was interested in newspaper publicity or anything else. I can't eat newspaper clippings. I made my report because I thought it was my duty. It was the only proper and American thing to do. I saw what I saw." Other pilots, some of them wishing to remain anonymous, would call Kenneth over the years to tell him that they too had encountered flying saucers. Kenneth also stated that he had read somewhere that 15 million people in the world had seen UFOs. That number has surely grown astronomically by now. Sadly, Kenneth Arnold passed away in 1984 at the age of 68. And throughout all those years of worldwide ridicule, Kenneth never wavered from his story. He saw something that day. The only debate is what exactly they were. Whatever the case may be, Mount Rainier is considered the birthplace of the flying saucer phenomenon. So what do you think Kenneth saw? Was it alien visitors, military weapons the public was unaware of, or something else entirely? Next up, let's take a look at some strange disappearances from Mount Rainier National Park. Sam Dubal. 33-year-old Sam Dubal disappeared on October 9, 2020 from Mount Rainier National Park. Sam had earned a medical degree and a PhD in medical anthropology by the time he was 31. A year later, Sam published his first book. Soon after, he began teaching as an anthropology professor for the University of Washington. Sam was only 1 month into his new position when he went on a 17-mile overnight hike at Mount Rainier and seemingly just disappeared. Sam was an avid hiker who had made trips around the U.S. and even had experience in the Himalayas. He held no illusions of how dangerous the wilderness can be. He went prepared, carrying a tent, a sleeping bag, snow gear, rain gear, a cell phone, a charger, and of course, enough food and water for his overnight hike. Sam is described as 5 feet 9 inches tall and 155 pounds, has black hair and a short black beard at the time he went missing, was possibly wearing a blue jacket. Sam started his hike on October 9th, and at least for a while, things went well. Officials reported that Sam was spotted that same day hiking on Mother Mountain Loop Trail near Mowich Lake. It is unknown how much further Sam got into his hike. When he didn't return home, Sam's family reported him missing the next day. His car was found not long after, and several days into the search, his water bottle was found. Mount Rainier National Park Service search and rescue teams conducted an intensive search for 9 days with no further clues surfacing. There were park rangers, volunteers, canine teams, and helicopter crews from the National Park Service and the U.S. Air Force searching for Sam. Park rangers deployed drones and forward-looking infrared heat detection cameras. Their search area ranged in elevation from 2,000 to 5,000 feet, with difficult terrain including dense forests, rocky surfaces, subalpine meadows, and various waterways. On October 17th, nearly a week into the search, the weather was good and a 50-person search and rescue team scoured the area. But then, as we often see in these cases, the next day the weather took a turn and the crew was limited to 26 persons. The day after, on October 19th, there were only 6 people able to go out and search due to the weather conditions. October 20, the search crew was back to 26 members. Then, on October 21 and 22, misfortune struck again with poor weather, which inhibited ground searching. and the search was thusly suspended. Authorities presume Sam had passed away by that point. Searchers have spent long hours scouring the area and not locating Dr. Dubal. It's heavy on our hearts, said Chip Jenkins, park superintendent. We continue to be in close contact with Dr. Dubal's family and will keep them updated as new information becomes available. On October 23rd, after the search was suspended, Sam's family started a petition on change.org asking that rescue teams continue the search for at least another 72 hours. More than 46,000 people signed the petition. Sam's sister, Dina Dubal, said in a Twitter post, "We cannot bear the thought of an abandoned search during this narrowing period of survivability." The National Park Service announced that teams had resumed the search on the ground after the request from the family. Despite the Park Service furthering the search efforts for Sam, there were no other traces of his whereabouts. Winter storms had blanketed much of the area with snow, and temperatures were dropping below freezing, even at the lower elevations. The weather had been sporadic from the beginning of the search efforts. The day after Sam began his hike, a storm washed out the crossing he would have used to traverse the Carbon River. The anthropology department at UC Berkeley posted on their website, "We're hoping that our own Sam Dubal, medical anthropology PhD 2018, who has been missing in the Mount Rainier National Park for over 2 weeks, will return. We continue to hope that he will be found and rescued. Professor Marianne Ferme is representing our department by joining the voluntary searches. Our hearts go out to his family, his students, his colleagues, and his friends in this moment of great fear. We know Sam Dubal to be a strong and resilient anthropologist as well as a talented doctor. May Sam return to his family and to the family of men and women in anthropology who know him as a dear colleague or as a student or a mentor," wrote the department. Tributes to Sam poured in on social media. Vina Dubal tweeted on October 29, "I'm struck that everyone who has sent me messages about my brother, whether they knew him for years or merely hours, feels and remembers the same thing, his kindness." Vina also wrote, "Sam, our love for you knows no bounds. Not life, death, heaven, or earth can keep us from being with you, and you with us." The official search for Sam ended after 15 days of intense efforts. Sam's sisters tweeted, "We carry your prayers, thoughts, and good wishes for Sam Dubal as we begin to grieve and celebrate his remarkable life and kind soul." On October 26th, Dina and Vina Dubal tweeted, "After a thorough search, the outer limits of time for survivability have passed. Our deepest gratitude to all, including the brave searchers and the community." Sam was presumed to have passed away, and the grieving process began for many, many people. On the one-year anniversary of Sam's disappearance, faculty and students from across the University of Washington campus gathered at the school's Drumheller Fountain in commemoration. Assistant Professor of Anthropology, Rafael Rabanes, colleague, a close friend of Sam, said, "He wanted to use the tools of anthropology to address questions of racism and build an anti-racist society and world. Though he had just started at the UW, he was already having an impact." The University of Washington decided to honor Sam's vision and what he hoped to accomplish in life. In November of 2021, the university revealed a new endowed fellowship established by Sam's parents, Bharat and Siraj Dubal. The family's gift, combined with support from more than 400 friends, family, and community members, established the $250,000 Sam Dubal Endowed Fellowship in the Department of Anthropology at UW, which will continue Sam's work and allow his legacy to live on, supporting graduate students focused on racial justice in medicine, health, or social movements. During his studies at Berkeley, Sam co-founded Radical Medicine, an inclusive collective that brings together activist scholars and community members, including frontline medical workers, united with the goal of rethinking and revisioning medical and psychiatric practice. For his doctoral research, Sam conducted intensive field work into the lives of former child and youth soldiers in Uganda. This research led to a full manuscript. In 2018, Sam published a book titled Against Humanity: Lessons from the Lord's Resistance Army, which drew from his ethnographic research of the LRA in northern Uganda. Sam's book can be found on Amazon. The life and work of Sam Dubal impacted so many people, and his disappearance has left a gaping hole in a family, a group of friends, and an entire community. No other evidence of what happened to Sam has ever been found, and as of this recording, in June of 2022, there have been no further case updates. Vincent G. 24-year-old Vincent G. disappeared on June 18, 2020, while hiking in the Longmire area of Mount Rainier National Park. Vincent is described as 5 foot 5 inches tall with black hair and brown eyes, and was wearing a blue and white tie-dyed t-shirt, black pants, and carrying a dark blue drawstring backpack at the time of his disappearance. He was an Indonesian student who was living in Seattle at the time. He had recently acquired a master's degree in business administration and was working as a production associate at West Seattle Foods. He was bilingual and spoke both English and Indonesian, with an intermediate understanding of Chinese and conversational Japanese. Vincent hiked the Alta Vista Trail at Paradise on June 18th, and he was last seen in the afternoon of Friday, June 19th, hiking the Van Trump Trail toward Mildred Point. When he failed to return home, Vincent was reported missing to the Pierce County Sheriff's Office. On Monday, June 22nd, a Be on the Lookout, or BOLO, notice was issued by the Pierce County Sheriff's Office for his vehicle, which was subsequently found at Longmire within Mount Rainier National Park. The park began an official search for Vincent. There were 3 major searches in the park around this time as well, which is a cluster of missing people, something we look out for in the missing persons community. At that time, most park trails were melted by about 5,000 feet elevation, with patchy snow on trails and in drainages at lower elevation. The park worked closely with the Indonesian consulate in San Francisco, California, as well as Vincent's family members. Tacoma Mountain Rescue, Seattle Mountain Rescue, Olympic Mountain Rescue, German Shepherd Search Dog Team, Volcano Rescue Team, Washington State SAR Planning Unit, and the Mount Rainier National Park Search and Rescue Teams all participated in the search. Nothing else was ever found after his vehicle was recovered. On June 25th, technical rescue teams joined the search to assist in searching steep, hazardous terrain. Alternative aviation assets were also used during the search, but all came up empty. Vincent's sister, Natasha, thanked the searchers and Vincent's friend in a Facebook post for their overwhelming love and support. Despite the extensive efforts, there was never any evidence of Vincent's whereabouts. His parents had to return to Indonesia without knowing what happened to their son. The search for him entered limited continuous mode, and as of this recording in June 2022, Vincent remains missing and there have been no further updates. Eric Lewis. 57-year-old Eric Lewis disappeared on July 1st, 2010, while mountain climbing at Mount Rainier National Park. Eric was climbing with 2 companions at the time of his disappearance. According to park officials, the 3 had been ascending the Gibraltar Ledges route in poor weather conditions with high wind and low visibility. However, the 3 were experienced climbers and everything was seemingly going well. Despite the storm and wintry conditions, the trio were making their way up the mountain. The lead climber was a man named Don Storm Jr., followed by the second climber on the rope, Trevor Lane. Then Eric was at the end of the line. At 13,900 feet, lead climber Don stopped to rest and Trevor joined him. They waited a moment, and when Eric didn't show up, they pulled the rope up and discovered only a coil with a butterfly knot. Eric was nowhere to be found, though Don and Trevor had caught sight of him only moments before. They immediately began checking the slope below, but there was nothing, no sign of Eric at all. After they searched as thoroughly as they could, they continued to the summit ridge in case Eric had somehow gotten around them on the trail. When they arrived and realized Eric wasn't there either, Don and Trevor returned to Camp Muir and reported the situation to park rangers. Since the ground was blanketed with snow, it should have been possible, perhaps even easy, to follow Eric's footsteps, but the only prints found were those Eric made while right behind his friends. There was no indication of which direction he could have gone. His climbing gear was soon found by searchers in an ice cave 200 feet below where he was reported missing. Eric's backpack, climbing harness, and snow shovel were found at 13,600 feet, and they found a small snow cave at 13,800 feet, but no sign of Eric. He did not have a tent, sleeping bag, or any food with him. Incident Commander Glenn Kessler said 2 helicopters from Fort Lewis assisted the search, as well as a dozen skilled climbers. Despite the efforts, nothing else was found, and it's still unknown why Eric unclipped from the rope. As of this recording, June 2022, Eric remains missing, and there have been no further update. Joseph Lee Wood, Jr. 34-year-old Joseph Wood disappeared on July 8, 1999, from Mount Rainier National Park. At the time of his disappearance, Joe was a writer and book editor in New York City. He worked at a nonprofit called The New Press, a publisher in Manhattan. As an editor of The New Press, Joe was also one of only half a dozen African-American editors in the business at that time. He was on his way to many more accomplishments, no doubt. Joe was born and raised in the Williamsbridge part of the Bronx. He had made Eagle Scout the highest ranking attainable through the Boy Scouts of America and loved the outdoors. Joe also liked going to jazz clubs, eating sushi, and writing, and was even starting to write his own fiction. He was educated at Riverdale Country School and Yale University. After Yale, Joe had started shooting a documentary about African-American students at the Ivy League institution. Jacqueline Glover, who worked with him on the documentary project, said, "A scene he really seemed to like was when one student who was searching to get his hair cut had to go to the black neighborhood. It was this great scene, being there in these two worlds." Joe had flown to Seattle, Washington on July 7th to attend Unity 99, a national conference of minority journalists. It was at the first such gathering, held in Atlanta in 1994, that Joe had met Somini Segupta, a reporter for the New York Times. They ended up living together for several years. However, the two had been separated some 6 months prior to the Unity 99 conference and had only a brief encounter after the opening ceremonies of the conference. Democratic presidential hopeful Bill Bradley was also in Seattle for the Unity 99 Journalism Conference. Joe was one of 8 African-American journalists to sit down for breakfast with Mr. Bradley at the Westin Seattle Hotel on July 8th, and it was said that Joe had jumped right into asking the toughest questions. The willingness to address the difficult issues head-on is what helped shape his career as an African-American cultural critic in the predominantly white precincts of New York's publishing worlds. Joe had even edited an anthology titled Malcolm X, in Our Own Image, as well as writing major features for Rolling Stone and Vibe magazines about actor Denzel Washington and musician Sly Stone. He was also working on his own memoir-like meditation on the African-American family in America. During his stay in Washington, Joe wanted to visit Mount Rainier National Park. Bird watching was a lifelong passion of Joe's, so he planned to do some hiking and birding at the park. After attending the conference on July 8th, he drove himself to the mountain and parked his rental car in a lot at the base. He brought a book, notepad, binoculars, and possibly a laptop, then presumably began walking up Mount Rainier's Rampart Ridge Trail. It's unlikely that he was equipped for any serious adventuring while at the park, as he only planned to be there a short time. The next day, Friday, July 9th, when Joe didn't show back up for the journalism conference, his friends who were in town were concerned, but they didn't think anything was seriously wrong, and Joe had only told a casual acquaintance about his hiking plans at all. It wasn't until Sunday, July 11th, when Joe did not return to New York, that Somini, Joe's former partner, knew something was terribly wrong. She began calling friends and family trying to locate Joe, but no one had heard from him. On Tuesday, July 13th, 5 days after Joe initially disappeared, Somini filed an official missing persons report. The next day, Wednesday, July 14th, park officials located Joe's rental car at the base of the mountain in a parking lot. Rangers immediately began searching for Joe upon this discovery. According to a receipt found, Joe had entered the park at 12:29 p.m. on Thursday, July 8th. Although he lacked more sophisticated hiking gear, a receipt found with Joe's belongings showed that he had purchased a windbreaker in Seattle. This, at least, was good news. However, according to Joe's friends, he had a heart condition that had just been diagnosed in October of '98 after he had a fainting spell in an airport, and Joe was considering getting a pacemaker because of the event. This was not such good news because it added the possibility that Joe might have had one of these fainting spells while on the mountain. Throughout the search on July 14, nothing was found to indicate where exactly Joe had gone. Park Service organized mini search team comprised of backcountry rangers, firefighters, and general volunteers. The teams fanned out along the southwest face of the mountain and scoured the landscape. They walked the creek beds, clambered down the ravines, and inspected whatever crook or crevice they came upon. Meanwhile, canine search and rescue teams covered the hiking trails, and helicopters performed aerial searches. The specific issue with this search operation was, during the winter of 98 and 99, Mount Rainier had been blanketed with the third heaviest snowfall in its recorded history. This meant that, on the warmer, sunny couple of days after Joe's disappearance, as much as 2 feet of snow had quickly melted, washing away any tracks or scent that Joe might have left while on the mountain. Nevertheless, the search continued, but sadly came up empty. On Thursday, July 15, the last known person to have interacted with Joe came forward with the first and only lead in Joe's disappearance. He was another hiker named Bruce Gallman, who had met Joe around 4 p.m. at an elevation of about 4,800 feet. There was around 2 feet of snow on the ground, but up ahead where Joe was headed, there was snow as high as 8 feet. Joe chatted with Bruce about the birds he had seen on his hike so far. Bruce warned Joe about an unstable snow bridge a little ways up the trail, but Joe assured him that he was going to turn around soon. The strangers parted ways then, and Bruce continued down the mountain and left the park. Daniel Abramson, who was a San Francisco-based civil rights attorney and had been Joe's roommate at Yale, said that Joe didn't own hiking gear, didn't have a special jacket. We think he went up with books and a writing pad and possibly a laptop. It would have occurred first to him to bring books rather than a sweater. Daniel would end up joining the search party, along with 5 other of Joe's friends. Joe was earnest in the best sense, said Matt Weiland, an editor at the New Press and one of the editors of the journal The Baffler. He admired writers and thinkers who thought about American culture and thought clearly and wrote clearly. On Friday, July 16th, there was a rainfall in the area that lowered temperatures, especially at significant elevations. This weather shift made the search more dangerous. Nevertheless, the search continued. On Saturday, July 17, Joe's father, Joe Sr., his mother, Elizabeth, and his sister, Pamela, arrived at Mount Rainier. By that point, search and rescue leaders weren't hopeful that Joe would have been able to survive the 10 days since his disappearance alone in the wilderness. Phone calls had come into the park offices from the Washington State Governor, Gary Locke, as well as the White House press office in regards to Joe's disappearance. Park rangers decided to extend the search another day, citing improving weather conditions. Still, no evidence of Joe was found, despite these extensive efforts. Sunday, July 18, an emotionally difficult meeting was held in which rangers explained why they were scaling back the official search and rescue operation. The rangers believed that Joe had suffered from a horrible accident or perhaps a medical emergency, and there had been no trace of him after hundreds of hours of location efforts. They didn't believe he was alive and on the move, since hypothermia would have certainly set in without proper equipment and shelter. And they figured if he had a falling accident, searchers would have found him lying on the ground. Instead, they found nothing. There were no signs of a struggle, no equipment was found, nothing at all. It was as if Joe had simply vanished. Rangers pointed to the mountain's various dangers being the likely cause of Joe's disappearance. 2 other men had also been lost on Mount Rainier so far that year. The park spokesperson named Maria Gillette did say that rangers would send a helicopter and canine teams back up the mountain once the snow melted. Otherwise, the official search was concluded. Friends and family were understandably devastated. Many people had even gotten together to hire a private investigator, but nothing conclusive was ever found. Everyone wanted answers, but there was absolutely nothing to go on. All they could do was mourn and wait for any further evidence to emerge. A final search was conducted in September of '99, and again, no trace or evidence of any kind of Joe was found. After the final search, Joe Wood was listed as the 65th person to go missing on Mount Rainier without being found. As of this recording in June 2022, Joe remains missing, and there have been no further updates. And finally, Chet Hansen. 27-year-old Chet Hansen disappeared on November 11, 1997, while on a day hike in Mount Rainier National Park. Chet lived in Wilkinson, Washington, and worked at Alaska Airways. He was known to be an avid photographer who planned on taking pictures while in the park. He was hiking on the Deer Creek Falls trailhead the day of his disappearance. Chet is described as a Caucasian male, 5 foot 10 inches tall, 170 pounds, with strawberry blonde hair. At the time of his disappearance, he was carrying around 35 pounds of camera equipment with him while hiking, including different lenses, camera bodies, and a tripod. He was lightly dressed, wearing shorts and a fleece shirt, along with hiking boots. The weather was warm and decent on the day he went missing, and the area he planned to hike wasn't particularly challenging, so there was no reason to suspect anything would go amiss. Chet didn't show up for dinner that night, but his parents weren't initially concerned because they thought he could have been staying with friends. The next day, November 12th, when he didn't show up to work at Alaska Airlines, his employer contacted his parents and they reported him missing around 2:30 p.m. Friends and family found his vehicle soon after, located at the Deer Creek trailhead on Highway 123 on the east side of the park. In the car was a set of negatives, including one from Highway 410 and another from the Tipsoo Lake area. There was also a set of house keys, his glasses case, and some papers, but there was no sign of any camera equipment or any indication of Chet's whereabouts. Authorities launched an extensive search of the area, although Chet hadn't left a specific itinerary. Helicopter, dog teams, and about 30 people participated in the search. Chet was a strong hiker and he knew the Mount Rainier area well. He also tended to do backcountry hiking and stay away from the trails. He had recently focused his photography on waterfalls and lakes, which gave authorities at least a starting point. Another park visitor, Willard Olson, and his girlfriend reported that they saw someone fitting Chet's description at Shriner Peak on November 11th at around midday. This helped narrow the search area even more. The search efforts expanded to include more canines, cadaver dogs, and up to 100 searchers, but no further evidence was ever found. As of this recording, Chet Hansen is still missing. There's no shortage of disappearances and strange occurrences in Mount Rainier National Park. We may never know what really happened to these people. Is there something otherworldly to blame for these bizarre encounters and urban legends? What about those who seem to have simply vanished off the face of the earth? Things can change instantly, and there's more to our world than meets the eye. That's why we recommend that each person who is venturing into the wilderness carry a personal locator beacon at all times. Such a beacon will transmit a distress signal with its coordinates when activated. Remember, the more prepared we are, the better our chances of surviving should something go amiss on our adventures. Well, friends, what do you think of the strange occurrences here on Mount Rainier? Until we meet again, be good to yourselves and each other. Stay safe out here. As for me, I'll see you a little farther on down the trail. I'm Steve Stockton, and I'll talk to you next time.